Hey, I'm Charlie. Welcome to the dev environment. Today we got a coding challenge that is pretty common, maybe intermediate front-end developer coding challenge. It's kind of fun just because it's like very UI based, very visual. But here, as you can see, we have this countdown timer that is counting down. And as it counts down, you can see that the circle surrounding it is being whittled away. And so to do this, basically, you need to be able to have like a starting value and then have it tick the circumference of the circle to get it down. It's one that we've given to a few devs. It's been really fun, just kind of like junior intermediate level. In order to do it, you need to have some memory of high school geometry. These are circumference, diameter, radius, these kind of things, basic grade 10 geometry. And then also some working knowledge of SVG. You don't absolutely need SVG to get this done, but it is really nice to have that kind of experience. And so without further ado, let's get into it. So here we are in our basic app component, and we have a kind of countdown component. They're both empty and nothing exists there. And so what I'm going to do is actually in the countdown component, I'm just going to put an SVG wrapper. I'm just going to set a width and a height, and I want to make this dynamic. So in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I am going to import them or take them in via props. So interface props, and then I'm just going to take it in. It's just like a size prop. So a circle has the same width and height, so we just need one value. So we'll just take in a size. And then in here, let's take size and sign up props. And then so the width and height, we'll just make it size and size. And inside of the SVG, this is where we actually want to draw what we want to do. And so we are going to use a circle value. Because the SVG is just kind of like, think of it almost like the canvas, whatever. It's just like kind of like the wrapping, and then inside of it, you can add paths, you can add circles, you can add all these things. So inside, I'm just going to do circle element, and then the circle element takes in some values. But before I go too far there, I'm just going to pop back over into my app component, and I'm going to import the countdown component. And then I'm just going to render it on the screen so we can actually see what's going on while we're working on it. Oh, it needs the size prop. And I'm just going to set that to 200. And so we come back into the countdown component. And here we need some calculation. So basically we're taking in the size. And so we need to do, just before we start plugging in the props, we need to just do some of these calculations with the map. So we need to figure out how to calculate the circumference, and we need to calculate the radius. So the radius is half the diameter. So if I go const radius equals, and I'm just going to take the size divided by 2, right? Because that's the size of the diameter. And then to get the circumference, const circumference is math.pi times radius times 2. And so we can see here, this is around the circle, circumference. Anyways, just trust me. I don't know if it's on this page, but trust me, it's pi times radius times 2. And then so once we have both of those, then we can kind of start plugging in our values here. So one that we obviously need is the radius, which is just the r, and that's going to be the radius. And then we're going to take what's called a stroke. So the stroke is just like, think of it as like the border of the circle. So we'll just set this to red for right now. And there we go. We can see things are starting. But see, the middle of the circle is cut off, right? Like we're only getting like a little pie shape of the circle. And the reason for that is we need to center it. So you use a CX, and CX is, and we'll just assign that to radius right now too. And CY, radius. And there we go. So now we can see the whole circle. I don't know if you can see this, but if I zoom in really close, there's a little bit of clipping happening. And the reason for that is that actually the true radius needs to be, you need to subtract the stroke from the radius, because the stroke, think of it as like a border, right? Like if I made the stroke width, let me just stroke width, and I set this to 20, you're going to see even more of the circle gets cut off, right? So think of it as like a border without border box or box sizing. And so what we want to do is we want to not have that happen. And so actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace this radius value. I'm just going to call it XY. And then I'm going to do a real radius. And to do that as well, I'm just going to make the stroke a constant. So I'm just going to set the stroke to size divided by 4. I don't know. We'll just see how that goes. So if I set stroke to stroke, and then XY is size divided by 2, and then the radius is going to be size minus stroke. And so I'm going to have to wrap this in parentheses to make this. And then I'm going to divide that by 2. And then so now the radius is there. I'm just going to update this X and Y, CX and CY. And then we should be better. Cool. That is way too large of a border. So I'm going to go 6. 8. Let's just go 10. Cool. That's good enough. Another thing is you can see that the circle is filled in. So that's with the fill property here. I'm just going to make this transparent so we don't have it anymore. And there we go. Now it's gone. And you're probably wondering, A, what are we going to do with the circumference value? We haven't needed it at all. And then B, how are we going to make the gap start appearing in the border here, or the stroke? And so the way that that's going to work is something really cool. There's something called a stroke dash array. I don't know if you've ever used SVG before or not, but the stroke dash array is a really cool thing. Like if I set it as 10, then you can see it's totally changed the border into a really cool way. There's like a 10 width and then a 10 gap and then a 10 width and a 10 gap. It kind of like is going all the way around, except for right here. This is the origin of the circle. And so you can see that there wasn't quite enough pixels on the circumference of the circle in order to have the gap there. So it's kind of like a little bit of an overlap. But that's really interesting. Like if we set it to, I don't know, 40, then you can see now it's really cool. Like you can actually have a lot of fun just kind of messing around with this. This is how loading spinners on almost every website is made. All you have to do is just make it rotate with like a CSS animation so it's really easy. But so with the stroke dash array, what I want to do is I want to set this to the circumference. And I know it's going to sound really weird, but what this does is this makes one single stroke that starts at the origin, goes all the way around, and then comes right back. And then what we can do is there's another property called stroke dash offset. If I set it to 20, you'll see it cuts out 20 pixels. If I set it to 200, it cuts out a little bit more. So the first thing you're going to notice here as well is that it's not in radians. It's not 360 degrees is the full circle. It's how many pixels all the way around based on the diameter. So we have math times pi times radius times 2. It's this calculation, the total, which we can console out if we want to see what that is. So console.log circumference. It is 500. Can you see that? Oh, hang on. Let me try and zoom in down here. There we go. Whoa. It's 565 pixels, 0.48. So this is what we have to work with if we want to be able to count it down, right? So if I set it to 565, there should be just a little tiny sliver remaining, and that is just the rounding, the 0.48667764 value there. And so what we want to do is we want to find a way to have this kind of countdown with the time remaining, right? Like as the timer counts down, we want this to count down. Now, in order to achieve that, we should really create a timer. And so I'm going to create the timer out in the app component. The reason for that is that later on, you might want multiple countdowns and stuff like that, and you want them to sync up. And also, if you did have multiple countdowns, you don't want to have multiple timers counting down. You want everything to count down into a single at a single time. You don't want to like overuse compute. So to do this, I'm going to go use effect. And inside my use effect, this is just going to be really basic. We're just going to do an interval essentially. And so here, just empty dependency array. We're just doing it on initial render. And then we'll go const I equals set interval. And we're just going to run this every 1,000 seconds. And then, of course, we're going to do a cleanup because it's an interval. And we don't want that to run forever. So clear interval. And we're just going to pass in the I. And then inside, I'll just console.log. Hello. Sure. Just like a string just to show you it's running every 1 second. Hello, hello, hello. Cool. And then, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create state. I'm going to call it seconds and set seconds. And that's going to be a use state. And then here, what we're going to do is we're going to have that countdown value. I'm just going to make it a const, just like the total like starting time. In any normal application, this is going to be, obviously, there's going to be like a time selector, I hope, where you're going to be having the countdown time. But here, I'm just going to set it as a constant, and I'll show you why we're doing it that way instead of just doing it in the use state. But we're going to need the total time, like this time value later, and then we're going to need how many seconds are remaining as well. So once I'm in here, we have the set interval. Essentially what we're going to do is we're going to go set seconds, and then we're going to take the second value inside of the setter. That's really important because the seconds value isn't going to update inside. Set interval is like initialized on render, and then this value isn't going to update, as well as the fact that since we're re-updating it every 1,000 milliseconds, like 1 second, you just want to make sure that everything's up to date. I think in this particular case, 100% chance that yes, it is going to be up to date with a second. But like when you're, let's say like the interval was at point or like 1 millisecond, right? It might not be fast enough. And so you want to make sure you do it inside the setter so that it is up to date. So I'm just going to go s is greater than 0. If so, we're going to return s minus 1, right? And the reason we're doing that check is because we want to make sure that s is not, we're not going into the negatives, right? Like s is greater than 0, we're going to subtract 1. Else, we're going to clear the interval because we don't want that to run anymore once it's at 0, and we're just going to return 0. And that'll give us a nice countdown timer. So from there, what we want to do, and you can see now that we're console logging out, the countdown is actually re-rendering each time. And so you're probably noticing that there's some efficiencies that we could optimize here if you're kind of more intermediate senior dev. And so we'll talk about that in a second. But so the first thing we want to do is I want to pass these props down to the countdown. So how are we going to calculate how much of the circumference to remove with each tick? Well, we need to get a ratio. So for example, let's say hypothetically that we had 20 seconds left out of 30 seconds, right? That's going to give us 0.666666, right? And so what we want to do is then take that percentage of how much time remaining versus minus or divided by total time. We want to take that value and we want to multiply it by this 565, 855, and then we'll know how much of the circumference to whittle away with each tick. Let me show you. So first thing, I'm just going to go time remaining, and I'm just going to set that to seconds. That's going to be our countdown there. And then also I'm going to have total time, and that is going to be that time constant. And this is why we had it, is we don't want to have to update this here, and they might fall out of sync while we're messing around. So putting it in a constant, once again, in a real world application, you probably wouldn't have just a hard coded 30-second countdown, but here we do. So let's hop over into our countdown, and we need to add those remaining, and that's a number, and total time, and that is also a number. And so we want to grab both of those, and we want to take them in as props, total time. Cool. And then, so what we want to do is we want to calculate that offset I was talking about. So const offset equals, and so what is it going to be? It's going to be time remaining divided by total time. That's going to give us the percentage of how much time is left. And then we're going to multiply that by circumference, and that's going to give us this offset. So let's like pop it in here. and refresh. And as you can see, it's ticking up, but we want it to tick down. And so that's a really easy fix. You just go circumference minus offset, and then it ticks down. Cool. We also probably want to see the time. That would be helpful. And so in order to do that, I'm just going to wrap this in a template, and then I'm going to come here and I'm just going to make a span, and I'm just going to go time remaining inside the span. And so it's just little tiny here. Let's do some styling to fix it. I'm just going to do inline styles today, just because too lazy to deal with other stuff. So first of all, I'm going to go position. I'm just going to make it absolute. Absolute. And then I'm going to make font size. And I'm going to do this dynamic. So we'll go size divided by 10. Is that going to be big enough? Maybe divide by 4. Font weight. I'm just gonna make this bold as can be. And color, let's make it red as well, I guess. And so let's refresh. Cool, looks pretty good. I'm gonna make the size a little bit bigger. Maybe 2 is too much. 3 is good. There we go. Another thing is, you see when it's ticking down, it's like got these really harsh edges. It's really nice. You can go stroke line cap and just set it to round, and then it like rounds it out. Looks a lot nicer. But yeah, for the most part, we have it going. Yeah. So I mean, when time remaining gets to 0, I think right now it's just gonna hold at 0. And it does. And so you can always do time remaining is greater than 0, then render the SVG. And then here, let's do the same check. Time remaining is greater than 0. If so, time remaining, else, we can go like done. And then that way, oh, that's good. Oh, what am I doing? Sorry, this is supposed to be a question mark. There we go. So now it's done. Yeah. We can even like change the color. We can do whatever, right? But there you go. You pretty much have a countdown timer. One optimization, just like while we do review, is that the issue here is that these calculations, this is re-rendering every 1 second, right? Like you can see, like if I just console log render. This is console logging every second. Tick, 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 tick. And so you're getting a whole re-render of this component each time. So this kind of sucks. It's I know it's not so bad, but like performance wise, like if you had multiple timers or all this stuff, or you had a lot of other complex computation going on and stuff, to redo this each time, like totally sucks. So a really easy way to fix this is 2 ways you could do it. One is in the use memo. So in the use memo, obviously, like for here, we would take in size. Oh, sorry, I just got to return the arrow. So we take in size in the dependency array, and it's just size divided by 10. And then here, I take in size. This would take in size in stroke. This would just take in radius and time remaining, total time and circumference. The other thing you can do if you wanted to is you can do it in a use ref. If you wanted to, is this going to give me autocomplete? There we go. Use ref. And then when you need something like stroke, it'd be stroke.current, right? Both work. Both are fine. Use ref won't update as well when you're developing, right? Like, but just because like it doesn't automatically re-render as often. But yeah, both work. But yeah, just I basically just wanted to show you like the optimizations here. Like the use memos are totally fine if we wanted to just do it. Let's go like use memo. Let's pass those values. Go. Do a dependency array at the end, and then we just gotta like update these. This is size, this is size, this is size and stroke, this is radius, and time remaining, total time, and circumference. Bam. Wasn't that hard to do? Saves a lot of compute times. It saves performance. Make your app a lot better. Let's go through. Let's just do a quick review of everything, and we'll talk about each step. So first of all, we're storing our seconds in a set state. This is important that it's in a set state because we need to re-render every time the seconds change, and those are done inside of an interval. Important that we have a cleanup for the interval, as well as in the setter, we're getting not only the state value inside the setter rather than depending on here, just for safety's sake. But we also are knowing that we don't want to go beyond 0. Like, for example, if I got rid of that check, my done's going to carry it over, but like we'll go into the negatives, right? Which we don't want to do. Clear interval when we're done. Like once we're at 0, we no longer need this interval at all. Clear it up. That's really important. In your countdown component, we took in 3 props. We took in size, time remaining, and total time. You could do this in a few different ways. One thing I would not recommend doing is doing the countdown inside of the countdown component itself for multiple reasons. One of them being that if you had multiple countdowns on a screen at a time, depending on when they were rendered and stuff, your ticks might be out of time, right? Like this one could be at, exactly 1 second. This one could be like 500 milliseconds later, and it'll look really weird on the UI. The second thing is that you don't want to have multiple set intervals if you don't need them. Just have just the one, and have it manage the entire application. The time remaining in seconds and the total time. So we took both of these because we need to calculate. Not only do we want to display the time remaining itself, but we also want to be able to calculate the percentage, like the time remaining divided by total time, in order to get that percentage here, to multiply it by the circumference, in order to know how much is ticking away, how much is left in terms of the circumference kind of disappearing as it counts down. The stroke, so we made this dynamic. The cool part about that is that, like, if we made this like 100, then it scales, right? Which is really great. If we make this like 50, if we make this 300, make this 300, it scales. That's the cool part about SVG. That's the cool part about kind of doing it this way, is that we made it so that no matter where you want to use this timer, no matter what size you want it to be, you just pass that size prop and it'll update and it'll scale with you. So that means we had to do a lot more calculations, which means we had to use it in a use memo or a use ref. And it's important that you do that. You don't want to be recalculating this every 1,000 milliseconds, right? Especially if you have multiple of these on the page. What the use memo will do is essentially, like, we take in size only once, right? And stroke is calculated once after size, right? So, and radius as well. So all of these values will be calculated a single time when the size is updated, and size doesn't change on each tick. It's the same. So the use memo is gonna hold that each time. The offset, on the other hand, is going to recalculate each time, but we want it to because we want the offset to tick down. So that's okay. So don't worry about that. You could just put the offset calculation here, like just directly in the property there as well. Totally up to you. So for SVG, knowing that you have to wrap SVG elements inside of an SVG, that's step one. The other thing that kind of like I kind of brushed over, but is important too, is that if you put the span inside the SVG, it's not going to display. You can't do HTML element, like the normal elements inside of an SVG. You have to have them outside. So it's just a little thing there. We made it do the little done text. I don't know if that's important or not. Maybe. Like, as long as it just held at 0, I think that's a pass in that particular instance. This is just kind of like icing on top of the cake. But to know how to use the circle SVG property, and then there's a lot of values that kind of go into SVGs and kind of what they do. So CX, remember, we kind of showed you there. That's like centering of the X on the X-axis, centering on the Y-axis. The radius, knowing that the stroke width actually comes into play with the radius, and you have to subtract it away from the radius value. I think it's pretty important because like otherwise you will have those clippings. So like once again, if I set the radius to XY and I save and refresh, you see that there is some clipping on the edges depending on how thick my stroke is. And we can remove that if we subtract it before we do the division. Stroke color, I don't think that matters at all in this particular case. It could be yellow, it could be whatever. Stroke width, that we calculated up above, and the reason we calculated up above once again is that it came into play with the radius calculation. This is another like reason why doing the calculations kind of at the top and then plugging them in is of value, because some people might go, oh, okay, size divided by 2, size divided by 2, you know what I mean? Like just doing them inside here, this is going to be redone every time, you know, and you're not going to, yeah, like it's just, it's inefficient. It's bad practice, so don't do that. The stroke dash array, knowing kind of like how to create that gap, now you know. If you didn't know before, now you know. So like if you're ever building a loading spinner or any of those things, you know how to do it today. And the stroke dash offset gives us that gap. It gives us kind of like that spacing. The stroke line cap is round. This is not important at all. If you had it flat, totally cool. And then the fill, we just made it transparent. It could be yellow and just kind of like make things more fun. SVGs are really cool, and actually playing around with this is really awesome. Like, I don't know, like you could just mess around with stuff. Like, look, we make a little sun just by playing. Honestly, take this code. I'll post it down in the description below. Take the code, mess around with it, and you'll have like a time of your life. You don't even have to do the coding challenge. Just kind of like see what kind of fun stuff you could do with stroke dash arrays and SVGs and all this stuff. Anyways, I am Charlie. This is the dev environment. I hope you have enjoyed. I will see you soon. Bye.